Chapter 51. Following the lead of Lord Velaryon, who stormed out after voicing aloud his exasperations. Rhaenyra didn't even try to hear out her father's pleas and left the room as well. What more justifications did the dutiful king even have to say? He already said that by marrying again, he will begin to ensure that they will be better defended. Due to their vulnerable line that is too easily ended. Rhaenyra understood all of this, she came to accept it, and had even given her own support to him by also assuming her late mother's blessings. But it was her own blind fault to not notice her father's ambiguity with all of it. Making it seem to her that he had forced himself into marrying Laena, yet it was actually Alicent that he had been alluding to all along. What a father he was. To trick her so. And what a friend Alicent is, her very best friend that no one can ever hope to replace. Who mayhaps has been working her hidden seductive wiles against father all this while. Rhaenyra should have seen through it from the get-go, how odd it was that she was actually present in a small council meeting that she had no business being. Granted that she should have noticed it far more earlier. Alicent's hesitancy and conflicted countenance when the topic of the king's remarriage was brought up. It's as if the Hightower girl had known that it was bound to happen, and that she herself was the all but certain marriage candidate to begin with. Oh, how Alicent tried hard to appease her worries, appealing to Rhaenyra through the loss of their mothers. Perhaps as a ploy to soften the blow. For Alicent was assured to replace the spot that dear Mother Aemma had made empty with her passing. For Rhaenyra, it was betrayal after betrayal. Through and through, her father and so-called friend had toyed with her. And as she rushed through the keep's halls with hurt and panic. Princess Rhaenys's words seemed to echo at her thoughts once again. About how, whether it be with Laena or to someone else's, her king of a father will remarry sooner than late. And sooner, it would seem, before spring's end. His new wife, which is Alicent in this case, will produce new heirs, and chances are better than not, that one of their babes will be male. And when that boy comes of age and her father has passed, the men of the realm will expect the boy to be heir, and not the female her. Because apparently, that is the order of things. And such an eventuality now seemed hard to accept, even when Rhaenyra didn't even want to be heir in the first place. Truth be told, she just wanted to fly with her friend on Dragonback, see the great wonders across the narrow sea, and eat only cake. But Alicent had pricked her plenty behind her own back, on the way to usurping her dear mother's spot as queen already. And the slighted princess didn't want to give that Hightower snake the satisfaction of taking her queenship as well. So, after mostly clearing her head and weighing her potential options, Rhaenyra asked to be taken to the dragon pit. Where Syrax awaits. And together they'll fly. Not just to release her frustrations in the freeing sky, but also to travel further than the usual Crownlands and Blackwater Bay. Hopefully, to find a great mountain range, and eventually spot the tallest castle there. Maybe to connect with her distant cousin, and ask her for the location of Runestone from there. Better yet, she'll just ask Jane where the famous cleansing of the mountain is currently at. To convene with an even more distant and estranged cousin that Rhaenyra hopes to convince. For the many bolder moves she's hoping to make. A new order of things she boasted to create. While the Princess Rhaenyra took an unsure flight on a journey she's never taken before, the Master of Tides was more certain of where he was headed. Calling on his great fleet to head back home, to the island of Driftmark, where he expects to meet somebody whom he has used a raven to call upon. And before long, the meeting did happen, in the halls of the newer High Tide, in front of its warming fireplace. Seated upon a comfortable seat, Lord Corlys narrated that House Velaryon's origins reach back to old Valyria. More ancient even than House Targaryen, according to some texts. But unlike the Targaryens, we were no dragonlords. He intoned with regret as he continued. For centuries, my house had to scratch out an existence from the sea, with grit and luck. When I ascended the driftwood throne, I knew what I wanted. So I went out and seized it. He claimed, and with confidence, he added. Unlike every other lord of the realm, I can say that I built my house's high seat with the strength of mine own back. I've always thought of you and I as having been made from the same cloth. He also said, while leaning towards his guest. The somberly seated rogue prince, Daemon Targaryen, who musingly responded. I wasn't aware you had a king for a brother. We're both men who have had to cut our own way through the world. Corlys doubled down and appealed that. We've been passed over too often. Daemon seemed not fond of that, so he just wondered. Did you call me to Driftmark and your new castle to remind me of my low standing, Lord Corlys, or was there some other reason? So, Corlys then asked. You've heard of the troubles in the Stepstones. Some Myrish prince is feeding Westerosi sailors to the crabs. Daemon had heard of this ever-growing pestilence, of course. To which, Curlys supplemented. I have been petitioning the king to send my navy into the territory, but he's denied me. It was never my brother's strongest trait. Daemon suddenly said. What? Being king, was what the prince unabashedly claimed. Emboldened by that, the sea snake then ranted. The crabfeeder is backed by powerful entities within the free cities who wish to see Westeros weakened, and the king's failures have allowed him to accumulate strength. If those shipping lanes fall, my house will be crippled. He added with a trace of hate. And I will not have Driftmark beggared while our king idles himself with feasts, and balls, and tourneys. I will speak of my brother as I wish. Daemon interjectingly said and then threateningly warned that. You will not. But the decorated Velaryon was not deterred and just pivoted. Waiting in the stepstones is a chance for you to prove your worth to any who might yet doubt it. We are the realm's second sons, Daemon. He supplemented. Our worth is not given. It must be made. And as much as Daemon stoically acted. Acting as if he considered himself above such embellished wagging of tongue. Curlys knew that his words still reached something deep within the disgraced prince. For the stepstones was a chance to prove themselves, and winning the scuffle would highlight the crown's obvious inactions. Stomping on the already frail reputation of that Viserys, which should almost make up the shame he gave to the Velaryons for rejecting Rhaenyra, who should have been a more than suitable match to him. And maybe even wipe that smug smirk of victory that hateful Otto had on his gaunt face. And the Prince Daemon would have his own glory, and another way to get the attention of the weak brother whom he was oddly protective and obsessed about. Of course, no doubt they would also overshadow the brilliance of the young Bronze and his Bronze Order with this move. A way for the neglectful father to be a step above the ever-glorious son he neglected, and a way for Curlys to re-establish his might against Runestone, which rejected his most generous of offers. In hindsight, he shouldn't have sent the zealous Vaemond as an envoy all those moons ago, but Curlys was confident that he could still salvage the mistake. Especially after his grand fleet and Daemon's bloodworm can smash the crabfeeder and the Triarchy with undeniable ease. Chapter 52. What the heck, was what Ronin muttered. Inside of his cozy setup of a tent. Of course, half-sleeping in his temporary quarters was one thing while surveying the mountains with his birdly squadron was another. After all, he sort of still needed to find the Sons of the Mist, and moving under the cover of the night is what he assumed they're doing. Probably to smartly avoid Captain America and his wingmen. Dove's Taka no Mise, and Eagle's Eagle Eyes, which are just standard and non-Kuroko. So, he literally had just transferred the focus of his warging ability unto other winged hunters with a night affinity, which were obviously owls. In any case, as Dexter would say, tonight's the night. But how could Ronin have expected to actually just spot a literal piss yellow dragon, looking quite lost in the mountainous airspace? With Rhaenyra very much crying as she rode on it. Did episode 2 happen already? Was what he can't help but also mutter out. But given the passing of time, it probably already did. Though, he wasn't sure if Rhaenyra actually did a fake running away from home trick that most children do to express their frustrations. Right after all of Viserys' stupidity, Ronin couldn't blame her really. Then again, instead of just taking a few steps outside and heading back almost instantly, she was using a long-distance dragon, arriving at the great natural border of the Vale. At this ungodly hour. And by the looks of it, she just seemed lost, cause her cries didn't look like the cries of someone betrayed and hurt, but the teary eyes of someone who was panicking and very much scared because she didn't know her way. Tonight was a moonless night in particular, and unless she has some potion of night vision or a honed aerial navigation skill, then she's pretty much cooked. Probably already imagining in her head that she would be the second coming of Rhea Targaryen or whatnot. And yeah, Ronin sort of pitied the girl who only looked like the actress for Supergirl but had no actual Supergirl sense at all. So, with the bare minimum kindness of his heart, he helped out. Anonymously. Using the very owl he's using to observe her, to open an impromptu Hooters restaurant. But big bazongas weren't the appeal for this resto, for what's being served up is an actual hooter. So, hoot, 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 was what the silent feathered owl had to do, to get Syrax's attention. Alas, it wasn't enough, so a pellet had to be remotely coughed up, and a little whitewash had to be, strategically, flung as well. And yes, it became a very precarious carotone-sticking situation from there on out. For the petty and pretty she-dragon did not take kindly to bird excrement. With the brave and maneuvering excrementer barely escaping many chomps of certain death. But yeah, it still got chomped to death after some while. 'Cause dragons are dragons for a reason, and owls are owls. Fortunately, throughout the process, the Rhaegabated dragon was guided in a certain direction, and Rhaenyra should have gotten a hold of her bearing, with all that rocking and twirling that her ride suddenly did. And if they just stay straight from there, back to King's Landing is what they'll reach. After all, Ronin just had directional and surveying skills as well. Something he's learned along the way to hopefully map the entire Vale during this campaign and all that. Nama style. Or it could also be Craig of the Creek style. Either way, it was to establish optimal routes, getting to know the lay of the land, and whatnot. But yeah, it clearly comes in handy when doing a relatively good deed for a princess in distress as well. Assuming that Rhaenyra will actually head directly to the dragon pit and then the Red Keep to pout to daddy, and not derail herself to anywhere else in particular. Chapter 53. On a certain night, a number of Order men tasked to watch over during the hour of the eel, claimed that they heard the furious roar of a dragon, echoing the mountains from afar, making some of the handy K9s restless for quite some while. And as much as they expected for their little leader to be someone who summoned some dragon from somewhere, those roar-hearing claimants must just be imagining things. The night shift just is that to people. For the turns were fairly rotational, and they've all been there. Needing to be alert despite the urge to shut eyes. Even with the energizing coffee brew that the young industrious lord introduced as a late-hour remedy. Consequently, after a couple of vigilant and defensive nights like that, it was finally the day that they attack. Or, officially, go on the offensive. For the young Bronze had already disseminated the meticulous and cautious plan that he'd drafted up, against the Sons of the Tree on their tall-treed territory. Branch-chopping and vine-swinging warfarers, who know their surprising Lidance mountain forest like the back of their hand. Aside from that, the Bronze Order also had to be prepared for the other clans that chose to nestle under the Tree Sun's canopies. Principal to look out for were the Frog Pickers and the Prowlers. Offshoot variants of the Milk Snakes and the Howlers. It was how these clans got as plentiful as they were anyways. A member at some point would be fed up with the established ways, and branch off to make another. The frog-picking founder, according to early tortured milk snakers, didn't like snakes that much and was more sympathetic to the poisonous frogs that they usually force-fed to their slithering pets to potentially increase venom lethality. The Frog Picker clan, who follow this snaketrader's developed methods, use thin and tiny sticks, which they'll pick onto poisonous frog secretions, then use that as either a projectile or for close contact applications. Compared to what the milk snakes preferred, these laced sticks just had numbing and paralyzing effects, for the frog pickers to eventually have their odd ways with their preys. Frog carers yet were more cruel to the men and women they came across. Morbid story short, it was just best to think of them as milk snakes 2.0, according to the little leader. While the prowlers were just the howlers 2.0, as well, albeit much more quiet and actually mingling with shadowcats instead of wolves. And at this point, it had come to their attention that the white eyes that their little lord easily killed might have actually been a skin changer from the stories, and chances are that these prowlers had a skin changer leader in their midst. Granted, they were also told that there was a bear hugger to be wary of, for this so-called Goldilocks was apparently raised by rare cave bears, and they assumed that it might just be a skin changer too. For everyone they're about to be up against seems to be so. Fortunately, there were still some normal ones, like the sharp-tooths, the noseless, the spear-armed, the two-tongued, the six-fingered, the pierced, the roped men, and so on. Relatively odd in their own rights, but relatively normal with all things considered. Especially when there's still the so-called final boss, someone that the young leader speculated to probably be related to the more mythical children of the forest. Making what was to happen next beyond normal. But, they were the Order of the Bronze, were they not? And this glory would no doubt be theirs. To make for a tale and song for the ages in the Vale. This was to be the cleansing of the mountains. Or the healing of the hills, depending on what one preferred. With the men psyched, and mostly following the plan to the dot, it ended just as well as Ronin had expected. Sneaking and rushing before the Tarzanesque clansmen could take to their vantage points. Before long, the non-threats and innocents were rounded up in one clearing, some of them crying in grief, some crying as a release, or just baby crying because most of them were literal babies. Most of the goon types were either roped up or dead, with the deadies being the consequence of resisting arrest way too much, and there was not much else that could be done about that. Casualties are casualties, and were to be expected. Even in the Bronze Order, wherein two were unfortunately dead, the first and second major casualties of this ambitious endeavor. While injuries and some gashes were accrued by some, here and there, throughout these half a year, it was still quite the miracle that the death of their comrades had been kept to an outstanding nil. Till now. Which were the two men assigned at edge zones, who just couldn't contain the more panicky types who ran their way. There's probably some carelessness on their part and a burst of desperation from the cowards, and then the losses were made. Which was such a shame, but they should manage. Like managing to catch up to the culprits and just beheading them in outright retaliation. And yes, it's actually not because of the surprising might of the clan leader types. 'Cause even when Ronin might seem to have his hands full with the supernatural lot of them, he still allotted well enough formations and positionings that limited their cut above intensity. The Prowler skin changers simply had to have their shadowcats up against the dogs, and they mostly became limited. While the bear hugger he aptly read, Goldilocks, was the real problem he prioritized, because she actually had 3 grizzly-esque bears on her beck and call. But yeah, all he had to do was not go too hard or too soft, but be just right. At killing them in an orderly fashion, starting with Papa Bear, to Mama Bear, to Son Bear, and then the adopted changed skin woman. For said woman literally wore a torn-off face for a mask and was very bearish. So, an "I can fix her" attitude was just not worth it in his opinion. And while he did so, arrows were already lodged by his men into the prowling shadowcatters. From there, it became much easier, cause the remaining leader types were pretty much just decent fighters with odd body modifications. Like how the leader of 6-fingered actually had 7 fingers, so, congratulations to him at least. However, the biggest bust of them all should be the great son of the tree. Leader of the sons of the tree. Presumed to be a children of the forest, but Ronin himself finally checked up close, and the short dude was actually a fraud. Not even a dudette, like how he remembered the children to look in the show. Just a little boy that probably rubs himself daily in slightly green-tinted gray ash to look the part, making for a budding con artist. But given that this was their known leader figure for who knows how long now, it was clearly some systematic to themselves that was perpetuated to steady their belief system. Of old gods, of heart trees, and the magical forest children. And after, politely, asking around, it would seem that their great son was really just a puppet propped up to be replaced by another, after one goes through the puberty cycle. So, sacrificial sacrilege or just an established ritual, cause the aging great sons are said be buried under a fresh weirwood sapling, planted by the newly chosen great son. Which really made Ronin question whether if that's actually how those man-faced trees are created, or was this the tree son's twisted way of twisting things. Then again, it was just freaky, and he simply pivoted to look to the bright side. Especially the fact that these burials were supposedly done with weirwood planting. Weirwood of all woods. And for all he cares, all of the faced trees they'll have is an actual magical medium that can be ruined. A treasure trove situated within their special godswood, hidden amidst their lush forest. Perhaps the biggest and most lucrative loot that this self-given mission will ever award to him. All their years of sweat and bloody tears, for Ronin's easy pickings. Chapter 54. Then again, he probably should have checked said treasure trove first before he got hyped. 'Cause the weirwood grove he expected was paltry as heck, when he was finally led there to see it for what it is. Yes, their reclusive godswood had a giant heart tree, the very tree that they were supposed to be sons of. Old and very authentic as can be. But the rest of the weirwoody plantation he had drummed up in his head was nothing special at all. Sure, there seemed to be 23 other established weirwoods, with very botched carvings, but where were the other hundreds and hundreds of trunks that marked the graves of youth that weren't allowed to grow up? Representing generations upon generations of great sons. Sons that were made great for their sacrifice. Yet after finding a relatively flattened plot of land, overgrown with grass that strangled the many little treelings that could have been. What happened to them could already be guessed. All the winterings, inadequate tree growing knowledge, and prioritizing the few at the expense of the many. Probably. With Ronin finding it just a tad depressing. Because 24 was good and all, but yeah, he should have been a bit more conservative with his overimaginations. Probably serves him right for treating it as a blind box and not having any of his wargs look ahead. Fortunately, he was quick to bounce back from this simple mismatch of expectations, by humming a nursery song in their still passable sapling nursery. And the green grass grows all around, was what it was called. Whilst he also looked around to see what he could try and salvage from the deader lot. Accordingly, with the assurance that dead weirwood was still something he could work with, Ronin moved on while the rest of the Bronze Order were also moving on. After all, this head-on collision with this bunch was about the last batch of clansmen in the Mountain of the Moon. His birds double-checked, and the whole mountain range was technically cleansed of the Highlanders, save for those misty mysteries. So, it was pretty straightforward from there. Straight towards the fingers, that is. For after the clearing of the chunky peninsula where Gulltown and Runestone were at, and the Moon Mountains made relatively spotless as well, then the prominent five fingers were what's next. The five narrowing peninsulas of the Vale, which are described to be windswept, treeless, bare, and stony, but the many houses situated on the middle finger would probably beg to differ. Either way, it should make the finding of leftover tribesfolk to be comparatively easier than how it was. To serve as a relaxing crescendo of sorts to the turbulent times that these past few had been. And for the most part, it actually was quite an easier time, for the remainders were only pitifully few and not as noteworthy as the prior encounters that they had. Some were even quite peaceful in the sense that they simply surrendered at the sight of bronze. As their exploits had clearly become spread, even when it is already at the tail end compared to new news. News like the king's betrothal and upcoming marriage to Lady Alicent Hightower, the daughter of the hand and bosom friend of the princess. There was also the resignation of Lord Corlys Velaryon from being the master of ships, as he defiantly headed to war in the Stepstones. With the rogue Prince Daemon Targaryen and his Caraxes tagging along. To face against the crabfeeder and the Triarchy, the three cities that are rumored to fund those crabfeeding eccentricities. Which were quite intriguing but matters that were too distant for the locals to truly dive into. Aside from the whispered spotting of a dragon in their region, that is. So, those roar-hearing and sleep-deprived claimants might have some credibility to them. Either way, who in their right mind would try to meet this dragon of rumors? So, the fanfare was still towards the Bronze Order's way, with many lords said to be preparing feasts in their honor. Alas, before any guest right could be awkwardly turned down, their young lord was already quick to decline, as he is on a time crunch. So, to their duties they must attend to. Rounding up tribesfolk, hunting the tinmen that were located at some cross of two fingers, and that was about it. With their washing of the fingers being very smooth, and it made for another song title for the bards to dither on about. All in all, it ended at the littlest finger, the little finger, which was quite the barren land with not even any assigned lord. Making it the perfect settlement for the messmakers of the Vale. Their last stand of sorts. In any case, the Bronze Order still made quick work of them. Even the Vilekins that were the fiercest among the bunch, along with the most elusive sons of the mist that were found at last. And despite the dull simplicity of it all, it still officially ended the unprecedented saga that this was. Ridding the hills, the mountains, and the fingers of their most persistent plague. They had done all of it. Which was a feat worth remembering, a feat worth commemorating, and a feat worth celebrating. Under the command of the young Bronze, the Esser Ronin of the Royces. And yes, Ronin was someone who commemorated the achievement, by using a big canvas he had prepared. He actually planned to use it to collate his ultra-detailed mapping of the Vale, but what the heck. He'll just procure another canvas. While this one he'll use to sort of immortalize the moment. Directing the men on where they should stand, the taller ones like Uncle Gunthor in the back, while the shorter dudes can be up front. Some may even have to prop themselves up on a rock or two, and plenty will have to sit down. And yeah, include some of the more docile prisoners to serve as proof of what this was about. In any case, the Order of the Bronze still did what they were told, even when they weren't exactly sure, what even is this? Much more so when Ronin himself scooched into their formation and was told to look into the eyes of an overlooking eagle and say, "Cheese." Long story short, the clueless Bronzes eventually did find out that they were to be painted like so. Only further down the line, of course, cause the process wasn't just as instant as Ronin hoped it would be. Chapter 55. In Lady Jane's Solar in the Eyrie. Jessamine Redfort could be seen polishing up the mess that her lady's blue dress had been in. Of course, as that was done, she also propered the impropriety that her own red dress is at. Whilst she did so, Jessamine asked. The Order of Bronze had truly ended what they themselves began. Many ravens from the fingers sent joyous words, while the Royce's message-bearing hawks more than assured it, "But how come you are still restless this early in the morning, my lady? Were last night's celebratory acts not enough?" She then continued as she moved on to fix her red hair. Looking seductive despite the qualms she was voicing. Implying that she was actually looking forward to another round. However, a tryst wasn't what was on Jane's mind, her countenance solemn. Her gaze towards Jessamine conflicted. The Redfort lass was now worried, Dropping the formality, she asked. What really troubles you, Jane? Many things. Jane said, so Jessamine uttered. What things? The consequences of Ronin's victory. Or victories, in this case. The Aran said as she looked to her dear companion. With the savages gone and with the Vale heading towards peace that it's never had, I would say there is nothing to be troubled about any longer. The consequences only being good, great even. Jessamine reasoned. And as much as I have ill feelings towards that pretty boy in bronze, he very well deserves the accolades and the praise coming his way. But the more the bronze shines, the more the falcon will have to mistake it for the moon. Jane muttered in crypticness, which just led Jessamine into confusion. Still, Jane continued. The young bronze taking only the stone crows into face justice would have sufficed. Especially after my aunt's death, with such a timely giving me some relief and respite. Enforcing upon my detractors that I have a great bannerman that serves me. But he just had to go beyond that, as he does. She sighed. With the whole capture of the clans and the tribes actually serving to make him undeniable. Is that not good? Jessamine interjected. A great bronze shield with runes and whatnot, loyal protectors of you errands. The problem there is that he is too good. Jane complained. Too good to be true. Yet true as can be. And, the exasperated Jessamine ensued. Can't you just be straight and forward for once, Jane? Why confound me with all this eloquence that is quite hard to comprehend? I was straight, but I bent for you, did I not? Jane asked back, but that was beside the point. The fact of the matter is that with Ronin being as great as he is, I may have to overturn it all to him. And that literally stalled the Redfort lass in place, thoughts and all. Only coming back to her senses later to blurt out. What? This was her fear manifested, as she rambled. You are giving yourself up to that man, that boy of all people, even when you've always appeasingly told me that you'd rather rule as some maiden of the Vale to many. I did tell you that, but duty may have me to otherwise. Jane reasoned. For as nonchalant and easygoing as he might seem in person, there is no denying his great ambition and his potential to attain all of it. A legend in the making, and someone like me can't afford to let him grow his grandness without purview. For the errands of the future and the Vale will not be at rest if I don't at least try to tie his cause to mine. The Lady Aran cautioned, to herself. For one didn't need to be some rumored seer of futures to know what might happen if runestone grew its strength further than it already has. They could be unstoppable, and Jane didn't want to just take her chances with only their honorable loyalty. I need a stronger assurance, Jessamine. Assurance through an alliance. Through marriage and blood. Before the Bronze Kings could possibly take back what was theirs, especially after they've absorbed their former partners. But, as of current, the Redfort's face was already formed with hate. Then why not just end that bronze boy's life? You have the gold for it. You even had the gold you lent to them, why not control him with it? The young bronze is formidable for many reasons, and the debt that I and Ronin have with each other seems to be something you fundamentally misunderstand. Jane then added. With the methods you uttered being far from honorable. Just deplorable. You errands and your words of being as high as honor. Jessamine mocked. What honor do you even have in this proposal you are planning? Maiden you may seem to many, but I have already sullied you, with mine fingers and tongue. Not to mention all the oyster licking we just did. She intoned. Mayhaps the last dalliances you selfishly savored before blindsiding me with this. Jane with guilt, could only whisper. That, I shall handle when the time comes. To which, Jessamine just laughed, with bitterness mixed into it. The unfortunate timing, uncertainty, and competition you thrust yourself into, O Lady Aran. She then mocked. Has your cousin's persistent presence these past few weeks inspired you to think like this? Her dragon's roars have been a product of rumors in your kingdom already, with said beast actually perching on runestone lands, after you yourself told her which way it was. Jessamine tauntingly enunciated. There, she acts as envoy, hoping to convince the Lady Rhea with every visit. Perhaps convince her of the very duty you belatedly tasked upon yourself. I still must try. Jane said, but she actually wasn't that deterred. For she knows of Lady Rhea's dislike of the current heir. Though the defender of the Vale actually feared the possibility that her slighted paramour was shaping from nothing. If Ronin became king consort or king of Westeros himself, Runestone's ascension is secured, with the Ares' continuance at his mercy. Or at the mercy of his descendants. Admittedly, Jane herself might just be thinking too much, but she must, for the threat she's envisioning is truly there. Accordingly, in Runestone itself, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen was munching on the special cakes that the castle's cooks prepared. Crab cakes that were so worth these secretive travels. Travels that she disguised as dragon riding sessions, to get away from the now restrictive atmosphere of the keep. The excuse she's made to not be as grounded during that disastrous first try that had her disappear until the most ungodly of hours. Salvaged only by that timely owl. So, she really strived to learn, with cousin Jane giving aid at the second try when she actually found the conspicuous Aerie. And from then on, Rhaenyra mostly knew her route in the sky, and knew what to dig into when she landed. Though not as sweet as fruitcakes, crab cakes were still unique, as they are much more tasteful than the cod cakes she's tried. It even made her wonder why a certain age-old crabber family hadn't come up with this much earlier. Fortunately, Ronin didn't need that long, and apparently just developed it alongside the many seafoods that their local small folk had become enthusiastic about. With Rhaenyra's internal praise of the delicacy pretty much echoed by how she outwardly savored it. Much to the headache of Lady Rhea, who sat opposite of her at this long table. Perhaps worried about the fact that Runestone had no dragonkeepers and that Syrax could run amok. Or maybe the Lady Royce just had her thoughts turning, due to the bold idea that Rhaenyra herself has been proposing all this while. Chapter 56. All this while, Ronin was actually quite busy. For one just can't rush art. And the picture just wasn't going to paint itself. Especially when it's set on a big canvas like the one he chose to go for. True painting, the sort that sought to capture every line of a man's face and the very weight of a shield on his arm, well, that demanded time. Days bled into weeks when an artist tried to etch life from pigments that seemed to want to defy him at every stroke. The paints available in this backwards world were still inconvenient things, with each batch fickle in color and prone to drying too quickly or not at all. There were no bright, obedient acrylics and whatnot that stayed where they were laid. None just yet. Ronin may have developed his art skills early but didn't really put some diligent development on the art stuff itself. Then again, he also made it harder for himself because he insisted on a realistic style. Not the type wherein a bird can mistake a painting of fruits over the actual fruits itself, but close enough. Either way, that was the true thief of his hours. For every single order member was tough work. From each of their faces, to what part of their body was exposed during the impromptu posing. Multiply that by 1,000 painted figures, each needing their own posture, their own expressions, their own place in the chaos of their awkward poses, and suddenly the task just got much bigger than it should have. A lesser painter like the infamous Austrian would simply smear odd shapes and call them soldiers. But Ronin wanted the challenge, and that required some investment. So much for the time crunch. Of course, with every smearing stroke, his proficiency was rising fast, and there was no doubt that heaven be giving him even better painting skills, at some point. Chances are that it's speed-related or some shit like a realism art boost. And that may not be as convenient as cameras and photographs, but it is something. Then again, this was also just him busying himself with whatever, because of some rather awkward turn of events that was brewing back at home. And at first, it was just Rhaenyra and her dragon visitations, so he had wanted to hurry on along to handle them as soon as possible. But midway through this commemorative immortalization process, Jane sent some words that she wanted him to read and deliberate over. And yeah, maybe another artsy excuse was something that Ronin could use as a delaying tactic. Granted, after that artwork was eventually finished, much to the praise of those who saw it, Ronin could only face the music. Most probably, wedding music. Then again, that didn't stop him from honing another craft. But instead of blending the colors of the sky and the dull colors of the Littlefinger landscape, this one focused more on the color of bronze. Or the actual metal of bronze itself. 'Cause due to the interrogation of the redsmiths and the eventual capture of the tinman, Ronin now had the foundation to work on the Royce bronze. Meaning that magical weapons were almost at hand. Crafting tools up and then enchanting them, with neat powers and nifty tricks. Through runes. A little late to start on, but what can he do when he has not much foundation to build up on? All those carpentry, dog training, and whatnot needed some written and word-of-mouth knowledge to begin with, while warging was more instinctive. Accordingly, the in-house forgers and forging relatives were just normal blacksmiths, while the ancestral armors were finished but expired products that were too difficult to reverse. Except for their etched runes that were footnotes that he scraped by with. He had tried, of course, transcribing those runes on newly forged armors, bronze or not. However, it took no effect, except for when he did so with an unfortunate bleeding mishap, which resulted in something that was unstable and unsustainable in the long run. But it would seem that that was actually headed somewhere. As supported by the smithing process he pried from the redsmiths, who worked on copper tools, yes, but instead of them being red-orange or reddish-brown or greenishly oxidized, red was noticeably dominant. For it would seem that their process had a more notable crimsonality to it, with every heated mold and melding procession being quenched by the blood of their victim. Which just seemed wrong and morbid as heck. But from that, it clicked in Ronin's mind. About how ancient Royce forgers or ancient redsmiths magicalized their bronze, via forging with blood. Magical blood, of course. As first men battling with the children of the forest and many ancient magic users for territory, one can easily assume it to be like so. Supported even more by House Royce's more ancient motto. Run before your blood runs. The literal translation of the runes in the sigil. Older and more fierce than the flimsier, we remember. Aside from being a boast of cruelty and assured victory, it also just posits their potential knack of hunting for blood. Sort of like vampires, but not really. Granted, the clue from the redsmiths was just one half of the bronze equation. The copper half. There was still the tinman, who was more about crafting with the heart that they lost. Which is actually just some Wizard of Oz BS that Ronin humored himself with. For the tinman's actual crafting process was more on ritualistic intent. Hammering away as if they were sinking their thoughts into the metal, into the trinkets they were making. Which seemed like a whole lot of nothing, especially when he's seen the tin and non-tin stuff they've made. Aside from the overt passion that was supposedly poured into them, they really weren't anything special. But Ronin knew better. He knew how skin-changing was the transfer of thoughts, and he experienced the focusing of intent when working with runes. Traits he's awakened. One after the other. Out of the two supernatural first men options that his Royce half could have awakened due to his Targaryen dragon blood, skin-changing it had to be. So, his ancestors and the tinman's prior literally might just be hammering their thoughts into the very malleable tin. Awards divisible and versatile thoughts, in these cases. Perhaps prepping the metal to actually have consciousness, a bit more conscious from being fed with a part of either the soul or spirit, to make it magical. Maybe to make it receptive of the more intentful runes, runes that were akin to rules and commands. Of course, these were all speculation until tested, but so far, magical metals really were a pain to produce, if they even were made this way. One needed the infusion of magical blood, while the other was very horcruxy. Perhaps made much more complicated when it came to the alloying of the actual bronze itself. Which really made one wonder how the Dragonlords made Valyrian steel as well. Was it more complex or actually easier? Either way, Ronin already had all this speculative knowledge to base on, and even when it could be quite far off, the theory should still be solid. Solid enough to grind through, and could be made even sturdier with heaven's rewards. So, by mixing redsmith info, and tinman know-how, to bronze creation knowledge that he had already, the page should give him ample optimizations and solutions eventually. And long story short, the page eventually did. After reading and reading his bullshits over and over, and way too obsessively, the theoretical, science, was finally in mind. Like copper to blood ratios, spirit and tin combos, and how to make such bloodied copper and spirited tin fuse altogether. All that's left were practical applications, and for the first time in a long while, Ronin was actually thinking of getting a dragon. Only because the beasts were magical blood banks, of course. Alas, he did not have such access just yet, while his other supernatural enemies were pumping ichor no more, so he may have to make do with his own. Donating blood, to himself. And because he didn't want to die from too much blood loss, the produced magic copper should only be pitifully paltry. Much more so when it was to be mixed with magic tin, and alloyed into magic bronze. By those considerations, it should only be enough to make jewelry. Maybe he'll even make rings and ruin them, for his betrothed. Then again, he wanted to go above and beyond, by making. Chapter 57. A compass, out of all things. For the consumption to be as minimal as can be, as long as he didn't magicalize the entire circular casing and the directional markers, just the pointer itself. The flattened type for easy etching, as the stitching needle version would genuinely be horrendous to rune on. So yeah, he got to working, dono drops and drops of his red essence, stripped a teensy part of his spirit, which was nothing at all to a multiward grandmaster freak like him, to finally get the Royce bronze in all of its potential glory. Then, he shaped it into a flat rhombus strip with a hole in the middle, and simply inscribed, toward, and, north, in teensy letterings. And yes, the running process was as easy as that, it was just the necessity of magical mediums that locked its utility for Ronin all this while. As for all the previous weirwood reserves he could have wizarded around with, those were executively decided to be shoved into the ribs of the Santa Maria. Granted, as of now, not only did he have a new batch of wood that was generously given by the sons of the tree, he also had another magical medium to choose from. Yet he may actually have three. For aside from the Royce bronze itself, Ronin felt that he could actually simplify to just using either the bloodied copper or spirited tin. But that needed further verification. As of current, he just needed to fit his always north-pointing bronze needle into a prepped casing with steady floater fluids, designed not just with cardinal directions but also with angle markers as well. All locked together with a thin but sturdy glasswork cover that he also prepped as part of the entire design. And thus, a non-magnetic compass was formed, leaving Ronin somewhat satisfied. Turning and turning the gadget, cause he was always amused with a compass's peculiarity. Much more so when this one was magic-based. Then again, he could have gone with magnets, but it wouldn't have been as experimentally enlightening as this. Granted, his compass also had the quirk of not being affected by magnetic fields and whatnot, so there's that. And yeah, he actually had the option to change into a pointer that didn't just point north, he could go for one that had south, east, west, and many else. Of course, with this special compass in hand, 'twas time for the next adventure. The cleansing of the mountain campaign was fun and all, but it was akin to local sightseeing at best. The truly unique destinations were someplace else. And Ronin wanted to go and explore them. Coupled with the fact that he just shirked his marriage duties with the excuse of being a wee 14-year-old. So, he felt that he had to supplement that with very long-distance trips. Meaning that it was high time for the anchored Santa Maria to set sail, into places across the narrow sea and maybe even beyond it. Like Columbus with the Santa Maria or Orlumbus with the Yanta Maria. Accordingly, the mountain clans and the hill tribes had long been settled. And the painting that symbolized that, had also long been hung on the castle's walls. A reminder, of an order restored. And the peace achieved. The wild and guilty ones took the block, while the broken and hapless remainders were sent to take the black. Barring the women and babes that were pouring into runestone itself. For education under some will of bronze. In any case, executions were consecutively happening in the houses that offered their dungeon space, each of these grateful lords taking their share of justice. While the procession of new Night's Watch brothers were taking the high road, the only land pass out of the Vale through the Blood Gate. Off to the north and its wall they go. But such matters were beyond Willem Royce now, much more so to Ronin, who has most likely locked himself in repetitive readings once again. Apparently tinkering within the forges as well. Willem believed it had something to do with the princess's actual reappearances in the territory, or the constant back and forth of Lady Erin's lady-in-waiting. Both lass flitting between from respective stations and towards Runestone, with messages clearly too delicate for ravens. But Ronin did come out eventually, out of his self-imposed solitude at last, and with new purpose. A new task, pertaining to the very big ship that Willem had long wanted to sail in. Meaning that it was finally time, for the Bronze Order to take to the seas. With Willem being first to line up for it. This voyage was simple, to familiarize Order members with the huge ship's peculiarities, and offloading goods to bravos while they're at it. It was about learning and earning, he said. To learn the great ship's moods, its turns and tilts and temper, haul goods to their destination to earn back the coins that Ronin had poured into the thing. And soon enough, it did happen, with the sea treating this trip kindly. For the most part. With the ship's bronze hull gleaming like a mountain cast adrift. Pirate ships fled at the mere sight of her shadow. Even the other Bravos-bound boats looked small when beside her. Truly overshadowing all else. No doubt the biggest there currently is, but just as Willem thought that everything was going to be smooth sailing with such a mighty vessel. All of them suddenly felt a great big bump. From below. A shuddering, soul-deep thud that ran up the ship from keel to mast. With the deck lurching beneath Willem's feet. Making him lose his footing, and then his balance, and then the sky seemed to spin, as he actually went over the rail. Into the cold, choking blue. As if the sea swallowed him whole. Fortunately, underwater, he was relatively fine, even as the surroundings seemed to turn vast and soundless all of a sudden. But then and there, as Willem's eyes struggled to make sense of the blued light, he saw it. The culprit. Not a reef. Not a rock. A whale, white as winter's first snow, looming out of the deep. A creature many times the size of the Maria. A mountain given flesh. A terror of the depths that is perhaps much older than any house or crown. A behemoth, but no. For it might actually be a freaking leviathan. To be continued.